Mark Sterling thought he had won the game of life. He had the luxury penthouse, the Bentley, and the young supermodel fiancée on his arm. When he saw his ex-wife Taylor sitting on a park bench, sharing a sandwich with a guy in a faded hoodie and scuffed sneakers, he laughed until his sides hurt. He walked over just to humiliate her, tossing a $100 bill at her new boyfriend and telling him to buy a proper meal. Mark didn't know that the man in the hoodie wasn't just a broke nobody. He was Julian Thorne, the silent owner of the tech conglomerate that Mark was desperate to sign a contract with. And that laughter, it was about to cost Mark his entire empire. This is the story of how arrogance destroyed a millionaire and how true love doesn't need a price tag. The rain in Seattle always felt colder when you were alone, and for Taylor Russo, the chill had settled into her bones 2 years ago and never really left. She stood behind the counter of Bean and Leaf, a small, struggling coffee shop on the edge of the city, wiping down the espresso machine for the 10th time that hour. Her hands were rougher than they used to be. 2 years ago, those hands wore a 3-carat diamond ring and held glasses of vintage Dom Perignon at gala dinners. Now, they held bleach wipes and counted tips to see if she could afford the heating bill for her studio apartment. "You're thinking about him again, aren't you?" Taylor looked up, startled. Sitting at the corner table, the one with the wobbly leg, was Julian. Julian was a fixture at the shop. He came in every morning at 8 a.m. sharp and stayed until noon. He always wore the same attire, a faded navy blue hoodie that looked like it had been washed 1,000 times, fraying jeans and old Converse sneakers. He had messy dark hair that constantly fell into his eyes, and he spent hours typing furiously on a laptop that looked like a relic from 2010. "I'm not thinking about him, Julian," Taylor lied, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about rent." Julian closed his laptop gently. He had kind eyes, a deep, soulful brown that seemed to see right through her defenses. "Landlord raising it again?" $50, Taylor sighed, untying her apron. "It doesn't sound like much, but it is when you're starting over," Julian finished for her. He knew her story, not all of it, but enough. He knew she had been married to Mark Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Logistics. He knew Mark had blindsided her with divorce papers on their 5th anniversary, citing irreconcilable differences, which was legal speak for, "I found someone younger, blonder, and without your baggage." Mark had a shark for a lawyer. Taylor had signed a prenuptial agreement she hadn't bothered to read because she believed in forever. She walked away with nothing but her clothes and her maiden name. "Here," Julian said, sliding his empty mug toward her, along with a $5 bill. "Keep the change." "Julian, the coffee is only $2.50. I can't take this," Taylor protested. She knew Julian struggled too, or at least she assumed he did. He never talked about a job. He just sat here, using the free Wi-Fi, looking like a man who was drifting through life. "Take it," he said softly, his voice low and raspy. "Invest in your future. Maybe buy a lottery ticket." Taylor laughed, a genuine sound that felt foreign in her throat. "If I win the lottery, I'm buying this shop and fixing that wobbly table first." "Deal," Julian smiled. Over the last 6 months, this had become their routine, a quiet friendship built on the ruins of Taylor's past life. Julian didn't treat her like a discarded trophy wife. He treated her like a human being. He listened when she talked about her passion for painting, a hobby Mark had called a waste of time. He encouraged her when she felt like giving up. Slowly, without Taylor realizing it, the shame of her divorce began to fade when she was around him. She didn't care that he seemingly had no money. She didn't care that he drove a beat-up 2005 Honda Civic that rattled when it started. She cared that he remembered how she took her tea, Earl Grey, 2 sugars, and that he always walked her to the bus stop when her shift ended late. But the past has a nasty way of crashing into the present. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the bell above the door chimed aggressively. The air in the shop shifted instantly, charged with the scent of expensive cologne, oud wood and arrogance. Taylor froze. She knew that scent. Mark Sterling walked in. He looked exactly the same, perhaps even better. His tailored Italian suit fit his broad shoulders perfectly. His hair was slicked back, not a strand out of place. On his arm was Jessica, the woman he had left Taylor for. Jessica was 23, radiant, and wearing a Burberry trench coat that cost more than Taylor's entire yearly salary. God, this place is a dump! Jessica wrinkled her nose, scanning the cozy, slightly worn interior of the shop. Mark, why are we here? My assistant said they have the specific dark roast you like, babe, Mark said, checking his platinum Rolex. We have 10 minutes before the meeting with the investors. Taylor tried to make herself small behind the espresso machine, praying he wouldn't see her. But fate was cruel. 2 dark roasts. Black, and make it fast, Mark barked at the counter, not looking up from his phone. Taylor turned around slowly. That will be $6, Mark. The silence that followed was deafening. Mark's head snapped up. His eyes widened for a fraction of a second before narrowing into a sneer. Taylor? He let out a short, incredulous laugh. Wow. I knew you were struggling, but a barista? Really? Jessica giggled, clinging tighter to Mark's arm. Is this her? The ex-wife? In the flesh, Mark smirked, looking Taylor up and down with disdain. Although she looks a lot worse for wear. Life hasn't been kind to you, has it, darling? Taylor's hands shook as she punched the order into the register. I'm working, Mark. Do you want the coffee or not? Touchy, Mark mocked. He pulled out a sleek black credit card. The Centurion card, the heavy metal kind that clattered on the counter. Make sure you don't burn it. I know how clumsy you can be. Taylor felt the tears stinging her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She turned to the machine, her back to them. That was when Julian stood up. He unfolded his tall frame from the corner table, closing his laptop with a snap. He walked over to the counter, positioning himself between Mark and Taylor. She's not clumsy, Julian said calmly, his voice steady. And you can speak to her with respect, or you can leave. Mark looked at Julian as if he were a stain on the floor. He took in the frayed hoodie, the messy hair, the worn-out sneakers. And who is this? Mark laughed, turning to Jessica. Look, babe, she's already moved on, and she certainly has a type, from a CEO to a hobo. That's quite the downgrade, Taylor. He's my friend, Taylor said sharply, handing Mark the cups. Just go. Mark ignored her, stepping closer to Julian. He towered over him in attitude, if not in height. Friend? Right. Listen, buddy. I know times are tough. Here. Mark reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He stuffed it into the front pocket of Julian's hoodie. Get yourself a shave and a meal. Maybe buy Taylor some deodorant while you're at it. She smells like desperation. Jessica burst out laughing. Mark, stop! You're terrible! Just helping the needy, Mark winked. He grabbed his coffees. See you around, Taylor. Try not to spit in my drink. They swept out of the shop, the bell jingling cheerfully behind their cruelty. Taylor stood frozen, the humiliation burning her skin like acid. She gripped the counter, her knuckles white. Julian slowly pulled the $100 bill from his pocket. He looked at it for a moment, his expression unreadable. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. "Are you okay?" he asked, turning to Taylor. "I'm sorry," she whispered, a tear finally escaping. "I'm so sorry he spoke to you like that. He's a monster." Julian crumpled the bill in his fist. "Don't apologize for him. Men like Mark Sterling think the world belongs to them because they can buy it." He walked over to the tip jar and dropped the crumpled $100 bill inside. "But he's going to learn," Julian murmured, almost to himself, "that some things are not for sale." 3 days had passed since the incident at the coffee shop, but the encounter still haunted Taylor. She felt exposed, raw. But strangely, her bond with Julian had deepened. He had stayed that day until she stopped crying, telling her dry jokes until she finally cracked a smile. On Friday, the atmosphere in the city shifted. It was the weekend of the Tech Horizon Gala, the most prestigious event of the year in Seattle. It was where the titans of industry met, deals were struck, and net worths were compared like baseball cards. Taylor knew Mark would be there. It was his playground. She was closing up the shop when a sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down, and Mark leaned out. He wasn't done with her yet. "Taylor!" he called out. She tightened her coat, trying to ignore him, walking faster toward the bus stop. Mark drove alongside her, creeping the car forward. "Come on, don't be like that. I felt bad about the other day. I want to make it up to you." Taylor stopped and glared at him. "Leave me alone, Mark." "I'm serious," Mark said, feigning innocence. "Look, I'm hosting a pre-gala dinner tonight at the Obsidian. It's a casual thing. I want you to come. Bring your friend. The homeless guy." "Julian, was it?" "Why would I ever do that?" "Because I have a proposition for you," Mark lied smoothly. "I still have some of your old artwork in the storage unit. I was thinking, maybe I could auction it off for charity tonight. It would give you some exposure. You're a graphic designer now, right? You need the networking." Taylor hesitated. She was desperate for freelance work. Her portfolio was thin, and Mark knew it. If she could network with even one of his associates, it could change her financial situation. "And Julian?" she asked suspiciously. "Bring him. I promise I'll be nice. Jessica feels bad, too. We want to bury the hatchet. Plus, there's a free buffet. I'm sure your friend could use a hot meal that isn't a tuna sandwich." It was a trap. Taylor knew it in her gut, but the desperation of impending rent and the lure of getting her artwork back clouded her judgment. "Fine," she said. "We'll be there at 7:00. "Excellent," Mark grinned, a predator who had just secured his prey. "Dress code is semi-formal. Try to find something clean." He sped off. When Taylor called Julian, she expected him to refuse. To her surprise, he agreed immediately. "Are you sure?" Taylor asked nervously over the phone. "He's just going to mock us again." "Let him." Julian's voice was calm, possessing a strange, cool confidence. "I actually have some business to attend to in that area anyway. Pick you up at 6:30? "Pick me up?" Taylor paused. "Julian, your car?" "It'll get us there," he chuckled. At 6:30 p.m., Taylor stepped out of her building. She was wearing a dress she had salvaged from the back of her closet, a simple, elegant black slip dress from her old life. It was 5 years old, but it fit her perfectly. She wore cheap costume jewelry to replace the diamonds Mark had taken back. She expected the rattling Honda Civic. Instead, a dark grey sedan pulled up. It wasn't a luxury car, just a standard Uber. Julian stepped out from the back seat. He looked different. Gone was the hoodie. He was wearing a suit. It wasn't a tuxedo, just a simple charcoal suit with a white shirt and no tie. It looked slightly off the rack, maybe a bit tight in the shoulders, but he looked handsome. Clean-shaven, hair combed back. "You look beautiful, Taylor," he said, offering her his arm. "You cleaned up nice." She smiled, linking her arm with his. "Did you rent the suit?" "Something like that," he winked. The ride to the Obsidian, Seattle's most exclusive rooftop lounge, was quiet. Taylor's heart pounded against her ribs. She felt like a lamb walking into a slaughterhouse. When they arrived, the valet looked at their Uber with disdain as it pulled away. They took the private elevator to the penthouse floor. The doors opened to a wall of noise and wealth. Crystal chandeliers, a live jazz band, and waiters circulating with trays of caviar. "There they are!" Mark's voice boomed across the room. He was holding court near the bar, surrounded by a group of wealthy businessmen and their wives. Jessica was by his side, wearing a red dress that screamed for attention. Mark waved them over, making a spectacle of their arrival. The conversation in the room died down as 50 pairs of eyes turned to look at Taylor and Julian. "Everyone," Mark announced loudly, gesturing with his Scotch glass. "I want you to meet my ex-wife, Taylor, and this is her new partner, Julian." He emphasized partner with a sneer. "Julian here is a man of the people," Mark continued, addressing his rich friends. "I met him at a coffee shop. I believe he's currently between opportunities?" Light laughter rippled through the crowd. Julian didn't flinch. He stood tall, his hand resting gently on the small of Taylor's back. "I value my free time," Julian said simply. "I bet you do." Mark laughed. He turned to a heavy-set man next to him. "Bob, you need a gardener, don't you? Julian looks fit. Maybe he can trim your hedges for minimum wage." Bob chuckled. "I pay $10 an hour. Cash." Taylor felt the heat rising in her cheeks. "Mark, you said you wanted to talk about my art." "Oh, right. The art." Mark waved his hand dismissively. "I threw it out, actually. Realized it didn't match the new decor. Jessica hates clutter." Taylor felt like she had been punched in the stomach. You lied to get me here?" "I brought you here to show you what you're missing," Mark hissed, stepping closer, his voice dropping so only they could hear. "Look at you. Wearing a dress I bought you 5 years ago. Dating a guy who looks like he bought his suit at a thrift store. You're pathetic, Taylor. I wanted you to see that I won. I won the breakup. I won life." He turned back to the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, a toast to success and to knowing your place in the food chain." Mark raised his glass. The crowd cheered. Julian cleared his throat. It wasn't a loud sound, but it cut through the noise like a knife. "Actually," Julian said, his voice projecting effortlessly across the room, "I'd like to propose a toast as well." Mark rolled his eyes. "Oh, this should be good. What are you toasting to? The dollar menu?" Julian ignored him. He walked over to the table where a bottle of extremely rare Scotch sat. Mark's prized $5,000 bottle. Julian picked it up, inspecting the label. "Hey, put that down! That costs more than your life!" Mark shouted, stepping forward aggressively. Julian poured 2 glasses. He handed one to Taylor and kept one for himself. "I'd like to propose a toast to irony," Julian said, locking eyes with Mark, "and to the upcoming merger between Sterling Logistics and what was the company you were desperate to sign with? Ether Systems?" Mark froze. The room went silent. "How do you know about the Ether deal?" Mark demanded. "That's confidential. Who told you?" "I know about it," Julian said, taking a slow sip of the scotch. "Because I read the proposal you sent over. It was underwhelming. Sloppy, actually. The logistics algorithm was outdated by 3 years. Mark's face turned purple. "You read it? How? Did you hack my email? I'll have you arrested." "I didn't have to hack anything," Julian smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a wolf who had finally cornered the sheep. "You sent the proposal to the CEO's private inbox," Julian continued. You addressed it to Mr. Thorne. Yeah, Julian Thorne, the most reclusive billionaire in tech. Nobody has seen his face in 5 years. What does that have to do with you?" Julian took a step forward. He reached into his jacket pocket. Mark flinched, thinking it was a weapon, but Julian simply pulled out a pair of thin-rimmed glasses and slid them onto his face. The transformation was subtle, but instant. He looked sharper, commanding. "Hello, Mark," Julian said. "I'm Julian Thorne." The silence in the obsidian penthouse was absolute. The jazz band had stopped playing. The waiters had stopped circulating. Even the ice melting in the crystal glasses seemed to pause. Mark Sterling blinked. A nervous, twitching smile tried to form on his lips but failed. "You're Julian Thorne," Mark repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Then the denial kicked in. It was too absurd. No, you're not. This is a joke, right? A prank?" Mark turned to the crowd, his voice rising in pitch. "Everyone, look! Taylor hired an actor. This is pathetic. Julian Thorne is a billionaire. This guy is wearing a suit that doesn't even fit right. He drives a Honda Civic." Julian didn't move. He didn't shout. He simply reached into his pocket and pulled out a smartphone. It wasn't the cracked, old model he used at the coffee shop. It was a prototype, a device made of matte black titanium with no logo. He tapped the screen once. 3, Julian counted softly. 2, 1. The elevator doors at the far end of the room pinged open. 4 men walked out. They were not hotel security. They were massive, wearing earpieces and suits that cost more than Mark's car. At the front was a woman with sharp features and an iPad, looking terrified, but efficient. "Mr. Thorne," the woman said, rushing over to Julian, ignoring Mark completely. "We tracked your location. The board is panicking. You've been off-grid for 6 months. The stock for Ether Systems dipped 0.4% because of rumors you were ill." Julian glanced at the woman. "I'm fine, Sarah. Just doing some field research." Mark's face drained of color. He recognized the woman. She was Sarah Jenkins, the CFO of Ether Systems. Mark had emailed her 50 times in the last month, begging for a meeting. She had never replied. "Sarah," Mark stammered, stepping forward. "Ms. Jenkins? You know this man?" Sarah looked at Mark with the cold indifference of a high-level executive. "Mr. Sterling, please step back. You are crowding, Mr. Thorne." The reality crashed down on Mark like a tidal wave. The whispers in the room started. "That really is him. That's Julian Thorne. I saw him on the cover of Forbes 5 years ago before he went dark. Did Mark just offer the owner of Ether Systems a job gardening?" Julian handed his empty glass to a passing waiter. He turned to Taylor, whose eyes were wide with shock. She looked from Julian to the powerful security team, trying to reconcile the man who helped her fix the coffee grinder with the titan of industry standing before her. "Shall we go?" Julian asked her softly. "Wait." Mark lunged forward, grabbing Julian's arm. In a split second, one of the security guards moved. Mark found his arm twisted behind his back, his face pressed against the polished mahogany bar. A collective gasp went through the room. "Let him go," Julian commanded calmly. The guard released Mark, who stumbled back, rubbing his shoulder, his dignity shredded. You tricked me," Mark hissed, sweating profusely. "This is entrapment. You read my proposal under false pretenses. I read your proposal because you left a physical copy on the table at the coffee shop 3 weeks ago while you were yelling at your broker on the phone," Julian corrected him. "And frankly, Mark, it was garbage. Your logistics supply chain relies on third-party vendors that are going bankrupt. I don't need entrapment to know your company is a sinking ship. I just needed a front-row seat to see the captain." Julian turned to the crowd of Seattle's elite. "I suggest you all check your portfolios," Julian announced, his voice carrying clear authority. "Sterling Logistics is leveraged to the hilt. Mark here has been funding his lifestyle. This party, that car, his fiancée's coat, on company credit. The Q3 earnings report is going to be unpleasant." The room erupted into chaos. Phones were pulled out. Associates began backing away from Mark as if he were contagious. Jessica, realizing the tide had turned, slowly unhooked her arm from Mark's. "Mark, is that true? Did you buy my car with company money?" "Shut up, Jessica," Mark snapped. Julian offered his arm to Taylor again. "Taylor, I believe our ride is here." They walked toward the elevator, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. Mark stood alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the ruins of his reputation. As the elevator doors closed, the last thing Taylor saw was Mark Sterling, red-faced and trembling, screaming at his phone as his stock price began to plummet. The ride down in the elevator was silent. Taylor stared at the metal doors, her mind racing. When they reached the lobby, the beat-up Uber was gone. Waiting at the curb was a convoy of 3 black SUVs. A chauffeur held the door open to the middle vehicle, a Rolls-Royce Phantom. Taylor stopped on the sidewalk. The cool Seattle rain misted her face. "I'm not getting in that car," she said, her voice shaking. Julian stopped. He waved the security team back. They retreated to a respectful distance. "Taylor," he started, reaching for her hand. She pulled away. "Don't. Just don't. You lied to me, Julian. For 6 months. You sat in my shop, drank my coffee, let me complain about my rent. While you were, what? A billionaire on a sabbatical? Was I a project to you? Some undercover boss experiment?" "No," Julian said firmly. The playfulness was gone from his eyes. He looked tired. "You weren't an experiment. You were the only real thing I've found in 10 years. He took a step closer, ignoring the rain dampening his expensive suit. "Do you know what my life is usually like, Taylor? I walk into a room and people see a dollar sign. Women date me for the clout. Men befriend me for the investment capital. I haven't had a genuine conversation since I founded Ether. I was burnt out. I wanted to disappear. I put on that hoodie, went to a part of town where nobody looks twice, and I just wanted to be normal." He looked at her, his eyes pleading. "Then I met you. You didn't know who I was. You gave me a free cookie when I looked sad. You defended me when customers were rude. You liked me, Taylor. Not the CAO, just the guy in the corner." Taylor hugged herself against the cold. "But you let Mark humiliate you. You let him treat us like trash." "I didn't care about Mark," Julian said intensely. "I cared about how you reacted to him. When he offered me money, you didn't look embarrassed by me. You looked angry for me. That was the moment I knew." "Knew what?" "That I was going to destroy him for you," Julian said, a dark edge entering his voice. "And that I wanted to be with you. Properly." He opened the door to the Rolls-Royce. "Please let me take you home. If you never want to see me again after tonight, I'll respect that. But don't walk home in the rain." Taylor looked at him. She saw the same kindness in his eyes that she had seen over 100 cups of coffee. He was rich, yes, insanely rich. But he was still Julian. She got in the car. The interior smelled of leather and silence. As they drove through the city, Julian didn't take her to her studio apartment. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My place," Julian said. "It's safer. Mark is volatile. After what I just did to his stock price, the press will be swarming your apartment looking for a quote from the mystery woman. You can't stay there tonight." Julian's place was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the Puget Sound. It was cold, modern, and empty. It lacked the warmth of the coffee shop. They sat on a sprawling white sofa, drinking tea that cost more than Taylor's car. "What happens now?" Taylor asked. "Now," Julian said, typing on his phone. "We wait for the morning. By 9 a.m., Sterling Logistics will be in freefall. The creditors will call in Mark's loans. He'll be desperate." "He'll come after me," Taylor whispered. "He always blamed me when things went wrong. Even when the toast burned, it was my fault." Julian reached out and took her hand. This time she didn't pull away. "He can try," Julian said. "But he's not fighting a barista anymore. He's fighting ether systems. And Taylor, I have a job offer for you." Taylor blinked. "A job?" "I bought the building your coffee shop is in," Julian said casually. "I bought the whole block, actually. I'm planning to redevelop the district into an arts hub. I need a creative director, someone who knows the soul of the neighborhood." Tears pricked Taylor's eyes. "You bought the building?" "I told you," Julian smiled, the ghost of his old self returning. "I was going to fix that wobbly table." But the tender moment was shattered by the buzzing of Taylor's phone. It was a text message from an unknown number. She opened it. An image loaded. It was a photo of her, taken from a distance through her apartment window 2 weeks ago. The text read, "I know you're with him. You think you've won? I know about the skeletons in your closet, Taylor, and I know about your father. Meet me tomorrow, or the press gets the story." Taylor dropped the phone. Her face went pale. "What is it?" Julian asked, alarmed. "Mark," she whispered. "He knows." The next morning, Seattle woke up to a financial bloodbath. The headlines were brutal. Sterling Logistics crashes after gala disaster. Julian Thorne resurfaces. But inside the sleek headquarters of Sterling Logistics, the mood wasn't just panicked, it was venomous. Mark Sterling sat in his office. He hadn't slept. His tie was undone, his eyes bloodshot. Opposite him sat Jessica, but she wasn't looking supportive. She was scrolling through real estate listings on her phone. "Are you listening to me?" Mark slammed his hand on the desk. "We need leverage. Julian has more money than God. We can't fight him in the market. We have to fight him in the mud." "You mean you have to fight him?" Jessica said icily. "My name isn't on the loan documents, Mark." "You enjoyed the money, though, didn't you?" Mark sneered. "Don't think you can walk away. If I go down, the credit cards get cut. No more Prada. No more trips to Cabo." Jessica paled. She was shallow, but she was pragmatic. "So what's the plan?" "Taylor," Mark said, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Taylor is his weakness. He came out of hiding for her. He publicly humiliated me for her. He's in love with the little mouse." So Taylor has a secret. Something she didn't even put in the divorce papers because she was too ashamed. Mark pulled a file from his desk drawer. "Her father didn't die of a heart attack like she tells everyone. He's in a minimum security prison in Nevada for embezzlement. He stole from a charity." "That's juicy," Jessica admitted. "But how does that help us?" "Julian Thorne's brand is built on trust and integrity," Mark explained. "Ether Systems handles security for banks, for the government. If the CEO is sleeping with the daughter of a known convicted fraudster, if I spin it that Taylor and her father are conspiring to get access to Ether's data." "It's a stretch," Jessica said. "It's enough to spook the board," Mark said. "I just need to get Taylor alone. I need to make her record a statement saying she knew about Julian's identity all along, that she was using him. She won't do that." "She will," Mark said darkly, "if she doesn't want her father to get hurt in prison. I have friends on the inside." Meanwhile, at Julian's penthouse, the war room was active. Julian was on a video call with his legal team. Taylor was sitting by the window, staring at the grey water. She hadn't told Julian about the text message yet. She was terrified. If Julian knew about her father, would he look at her differently? Would he think she was just like her dad, a grifter? Taylor? She jumped. Julian was standing behind her. "We have a meeting at Sterling Logistics in an hour," Julian said. "My lawyers are serving the acquisition papers. I'm buying Mark's debt. By noon, I will own his company. I want you to come." "Why?" Taylor asked, her voice small. "Because I want you to see him lose," Julian said gently. "I want you to see that he has no power over you anymore." I can't go," Taylor lied. "I have to check on the shop. The manager called." Julian frowned, sensing something was wrong. "Taylor, I have security watching the shop. It's fine." "I just need some air, Julian. Please!" She snapped, the stress boiling over. Julian stepped back, hurt. "Okay, take the car. Take the security." "No, I'll take an Uber. I just need to be alone." Taylor grabbed her purse and ran out of the penthouse before she could change her mind. She wasn't going to the shop. She was going to the address Mark had texted her. An old warehouse in the industrial district. She had to protect her father. And she had to protect Julian from the scandal. The warehouse confrontation. The warehouse was damp and smelled of rust. Mark was waiting for her, sitting on a crate like a king on a throne of garbage. Jessica stood behind him, holding a camera. "You came," Mark smirked. "I knew you were a daddy's girl." "Leave my father out of this, Mark," Taylor said, her voice trembling but loud. "He served his time. He's old." "He's a vulnerability," Mark said, standing up. "And right now, I need vulnerabilities." He tossed a piece of paper at her feet. "Read this script. Look into the camera. Say that you seduced Julian Thorne to get corporate secrets. Say that you and your father planned it." "I won't lie," Taylor spat. "Then I make a call." Mark pulled out a burner phone. "And your dad has a very unfortunate accident in the shower block today." Taylor felt like she couldn't breathe. She looked at the script. It would destroy her reputation. It would destroy Julian's trust in her. But it would save her father. "Mark, please," she begged. "Just take the money. Julian is buying your company. You'll be rich anyway." "It's not about the money anymore," Mark screamed, his face contorting with rage. "He laughed at me. He made me look like a fool. I want to destroy him, and I'm going to use you to do it." Taylor bent down to pick up the paper. She had no choice. "Smart girl," Mark grinned. "Jessica, start recording." Taylor held the paper. She looked into the lens of the camera. Tears streamed down her face. "My name is Taylor Russo," she began, her voice a broken whisper. "And I—" She paused. She thought about Julian, the way he drank his coffee, the way he looked at her, the way he stood up for her when she was a nobody. She looked at Mark. "And I—" Taylor's voice grew stronger. "And I am done being bullied by a pathetic, insecure man like Mark Sterling." Mark's smile vanished. "What did you say?" "I said no." Taylor crumpled the paper and threw it at his face. "Call your contact. Do whatever you want. But I am not going to let you hurt Julian." Mark's face went purple. "You stupid bitch!" He raised his hand to strike her. Taylor flinched, closing her eyes, waiting for the blow. But it never came. Instead, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse. The metal bay doors were ripped off their hinges. A black armored truck rammed through the entrance, debris flying everywhere. Mark stumbled back, terrified. Julian Thorne stepped out of the truck, but he wasn't wearing a suit. He was in tactical gear, and he looked absolutely lethal. Behind him were 6 armed security operatives. I believe, Julian's voice was low, terrifyingly calm. That is my fiancé. You are threatening. The dust from the smashed bay doors slowly settled in the warehouse, catching the beams of light from the armored truck's headlights. The silence that followed the crash was heavier than the noise itself. Mark Sterling was pressed against a rusted shelving unit, his eyes wide with primal terror. He looked at the tactical team, their weapons lowered but ready. He looked at Julian Thorne, the hobo he had tipped $100, who now looked like a warlord come to collect a debt. "Julian," Mark stammered, his voice cracking. "Wait, let's be reasonable. This is a misunderstanding. She was just leaving." Julian didn't even look at Mark. He walked straight to Taylor. He holstered his weapon, a gesture of supreme confidence that he needed no gun to control this room, and gently took her face in his hands. "Did he touch you?" Julian asked, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through her. His eyes scanned her face for any sign of injury. Taylor shook her head, tears of relief spilling over. "No, you came just in time. But Julian, my father, he knows about my father. He's going to have him hurt in prison." Julian's expression didn't change, but the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He finally turned his attention to Mark. Mark tried to puff out his chest, clinging to his last shred of leverage. "That's right, Thorne. You might have the money, but I have the dirt. Unless you want the world to know your girlfriend is the daughter of a convicted felon, you'll back off, and you'll sign Sterling Logistics over to me with a full bailout package." Jessica, sensing the shift in power was not going Mark's way, slowly started edging toward the exit. "Stay right there, Jessica," Julian said, without looking at her. 2 of his security operatives stepped in front of her, blocking the door. She froze. Julian walked slowly toward Mark. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to intimidate, far enough to show disgust. "You think you're playing chess, Mark," Julian said calmly. "But you're not even playing checkers. You're just throwing pieces at the board." Julian pulled out his titanium phone and tapped the screen. He held it up for Mark to see. It was a live video feed. It showed an older man sitting in a comfortable private room, watching TV and drinking tea. An armed guard stood outside the door. Taylor gasped. "Dad, your father isn't in general population anymore, Taylor," Julian said softly to her. "I had him moved to a private protective custody facility yesterday afternoon. My security team is running the detail. Nobody gets near him without my authorization. Not Mark's contacts. Not anyone." Mark stared at the screen, his jaw practically unhinged. You knew. How? Did you really think I wouldn't vet the woman I was falling in love with?" Julian raised an eyebrow. "I knew about your father before I knew your last name, Taylor. I knew what he did. I also know you paid back every cent of the charity money he stole, sacrificing your own savings to do it. I know you are nothing like him." He turned back to Mark, his eyes hardening into diamonds. "Your threat is empty, Mark. You have nothing." Mark looked around wildly, panic fully setting in. "Jessica, the recording! Show him the recording!" Jessica held up the camera, her hands shaking. I didn't press record, Mark. The battery died." Mark screamed, an animalistic sound of frustration. "You useless!" "And now for the business portion of our meeting," Julian said, checking his watch. "It's 11 a.m. As if on cue, Sarah Jenkins, Ether's CFO, walked through the broken warehouse entrance, stepping delicately over the debris in her high heels. She was carrying a leather portfolio. She walked past Mark as if he didn't exist and handed the portfolio to Julian. "The acquisition is complete, Mr. Thorne," Sarah said efficiently. "The board of Sterling Logistics just voted unanimously to accept your buyout of their debt." As of 4 minutes ago, Ether Systems owns all assets, intellectual property, and liabilities of Sterling Logistics. Julian opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He held it out to Mark. "What is this?" Mark whispered, looking at the document. "Your termination notice," Julian said. "For cause: embezzlement of company funds, gross negligence, and corporate malfeasance. You're fired, Mark. And because it's for cause, your golden parachute severance package is null and void." Mark fell to his knees. It wasn't a dramatic gesture. His legs simply gave out. "You can't do this. I built that company. I'm Mark Sterling." "Not anymore," Julian said coldly. "Now, you're just the guy who is going to spend the next 10 years fighting fraud charges. My legal team is already handing over the evidence of your spending to the district attorney." Julian turned away, done with him. He offered his arm to Taylor. "Let's go home," he said gently, as they walked toward the armored truck, leaving Mark sobbing in the dirt of the warehouse floor. Taylor looked back one last time. "What about Jessica?" she asked. Julian didn't even break stride. "She's free to go. She has to find her own ride, though. I believe Mark's company car has just been repossessed." 6 months had passed since the raid on the warehouse, and the landscape of Seattle's high society had been irrevocably altered. The rain still fell over the city, but for Taylor Russo, it no longer felt cold. It felt like a cleansing. While Taylor was building her future, Mark Sterling was watching his dismantle, brick by brick. The fall of Mark Sterling wasn't just a headline, it was a spectacle. The King County Superior Court had become a circus. Mark, once the man who wore $5,000 suits, now sat at the defendant's table in a drab, ill-fitting grey suit provided by his public defender. His assets had been frozen so quickly by the federal indictment that he couldn't afford his own legal team. The charges were extensive: 3 counts of wire fraud, 2 counts of embezzlement, and a conspiracy charge related to the falsification of logistics data. But the final nail in the coffin came from an unexpected witness. Jessica, the woman who had clung to his arm like a trophy, had turned state's witness to avoid prosecution. In a deposition that was leaked to the press, she detailed how Mark had used company funds to lease the penthouse, the cars, and even pay for the business dinners that were nothing more than ego-stroking parties. She painted him not just as a criminal, but as a pathetic man obsessed with an image he couldn't afford. On the day of the sentencing, the courtroom was packed. Mark looked back, hoping to see a friendly face. His mother wasn't there. His friends from the gala weren't there. The only person he recognized in the gallery was Julian Thorne. Julian wasn't there to gloat. He sat in the back row, face impassive, watching the machinery of justice work. When the judge, the Honorable Justice Evelyn Carter, read the sentence of 12 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole, Mark didn't scream. He simply slumped forward, his forehead hitting the table, realizing that the laughter he had directed at a man in a hoodie had echoed back to destroy his entire life. Across town, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. The bean and leaf was gone. In its place stood the Russo Collective. Julian had kept his promise. He hadn't just bought the building. He had given Taylor the canvas to paint her dreams. The ground floor had been transformed into a stunning, open-concept art gallery and community workspace. The smell of stale coffee and despair was replaced by the scent of fresh cedar, acrylic paint, and expensive espresso. It was the night of the grand opening. The guest list was a curated mix of Seattle's true artistic talent and the tech elite who were there out of respect for Julian. Taylor stood on the balcony overlooking the crowd. She wore a dress of deep emerald green, a color she chose because it reminded her of the forest where she and Julian had gone for walks, to escape the paparazzi madness of the last few months. She wasn't the timid woman hiding behind an espresso machine anymore. She was the creative director of the city's most talked-about cultural hub. "You look like you own the place," a voice rumbled beside her. Taylor turned to see Julian. He looked healthier than he had in years. The shadows under his eyes were gone, replaced by a vibrancy that came from having a purpose beyond profit margins. He held 2 mugs in his hands. "I do own the place," Taylor teased, taking a sip. "Or at least my name is on the door." "Dark roast for the boss," Julian smiled, clinking his mug against hers. "Earl Grey, 2 sugars, for the investor." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the crowd below. Young artists were mingling with venture capitalists. Barriers were breaking down. "Did you hear?" Julian asked softly. "About the verdict?" 12 years, Taylor nodded. She expected to feel triumph, or perhaps relief. Instead, she just felt a quiet sense of closure. "It's over, isn't it?" "The fear?" "It's over," Julian confirmed. "He can never hurt you again, Taylor. And your father. I spoke to the warden at the private facility today. He's teaching a finance class to other inmates. He's doing good, Taylor. He's safe." Taylor felt tears prick her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you, Julian. You didn't just save me. You rebuilt my entire world." "Come with me," Julian said abruptly, setting his mug down on the railing. "I want to show you something. The real reason I asked you to meet me up here before the speeches start." He led her away from the balcony, down a quiet hallway to a private studio at the back of the building. This was Taylor's personal sanctuary, a room filled with her unfinished canvases and sketches. But in the center of the room, there was an object that didn't fit the modern aesthetic. It was the table. The wobbly, scratched, wooden table from the old coffee shop. The one where Julian had sat every single day for 6 months. The one where they had first spoken. The one where Mark had thrown the $100 bill. Taylor gasped. "You kept it?" "I couldn't let them throw it away," Julian said, walking over to it. "This table is where I fell in love with you, Taylor. It's where I learned that a woman with nothing could still be more generous than a man with everything." He knelt down. "Do you remember what I told you that first day? When you said you'd fix the wobble if you won the lottery?" "I remember," Taylor whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Well," Julian said, his voice thick with emotion, "I didn't win the lottery. I won something much better." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. But he didn't open it immediately. Instead, he reached under the table leg, the short one, and pulled out a small, folded piece of cardboard that had been keeping it steady. The table rocked slightly, returning to its imperfect state. "My life was like this table before I met you," Julian said, looking up at her. "Unstable, annoying, broken. I tried to fix it with money, with work, with isolation. But it never worked." He opened the box. Inside sat a ring that made Taylor cover her mouth to stifle a sob. It wasn't a massive, gaudy rock like the one Mark had given her to show off to his friends. It was a vintage piece, a stunning sapphire surrounded by small, intricate diamonds set in rose gold. It was unique, artistic, and deeply personal. "You are the wedge that makes my life steady, Taylor," Julian said, tears shining in his own eyes now. "You balance me. You make me stand tall. I don't want to be the billionaire who rescues you. I want to be the man who stands beside you." He took a breath. "Taylor Russo, will you do me the extraordinary honor of marrying me? Will you let me be your husband, your partner, and your best friend? Will you help me fix the wobbly parts of life, together?" Taylor dropped to her knees, disregarding the expensive dress. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face in his shoulder. "Yes," she sobbed, the word muffled against his jacket. "Yes, Julian. Yes." He pulled back, sliding the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. "I love you," he whispered, kissing her forehead, then her nose, and finally her lips. "I love you too," she replied, pulling back to look at the table. "But we really should fix that leg." Julian laughed, a loud, joyous sound that filled the room. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a custom-made, gold-plated shim, engraved with the date they first met. "Way ahead of you," he grinned. He slid the gold piece under the leg. He pressed down on the table. It held firm, solid as a rock. Downstairs the music swelled, and the applause began for the woman of the hour. But up in the quiet studio, Taylor and Julian stayed on the floor a little longer, holding on to each other, ready to face a future that was finally, perfectly steady. And that is the story of Taylor and Julian. Mark Sterling thought his wealth gave him the right to humiliate others, but he learned the hard way that true power isn't about what you can buy. It's about who you protect. He laughed at a man in a hoodie, only to find out that man held the keys to his entire existence. It's a powerful reminder that you should never judge someone by their appearance, and that sometimes the biggest blessings come in the most unexpected packages, like a stranger at a coffee shop who just needs a friend. What do you think? Did Mark get what he deserved? And have you ever experienced an ex trying to ruin your new happiness? Let me know your stories down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and romance, please smash that like button, share it with a friend who loves a good drama, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next real-life story. Thanks for watching.